They seated me beside the swinging kitchen doors, next to the trash bins and the waiter's station. At my own son's wedding, I was invisible until the man who pulled out the chair beside me removed his sunglasses. That's when my son saw him and went completely pale. The music was loud, crystal glasses shimmered under golden chandeliers. My son Daniel stood at the center of the ballroom, smiling for photographs, looking every bit the successful attorney he had become. And I sat 20 feet away from the restroom sign, close enough to hear the plates clatter, far enough that no one important would have to look at me. A young hostess leaned down earlier and whispered, "I'm sorry, ma'am, this was the only seat available." The only seat available. I had given birth to him after 22 hours of labor. I raised him alone after his father disappeared. I worked double shifts at a diner so he could attend law school. And today, I was the only seat available. I noticed the way his new in-laws glanced at me when I walked in. My dress wasn't designer. My shoes weren't brand new. I didn't belong in their world of country clubs and generational wealth. Daniel avoided my eyes during the ceremony. That hurt more than the seating chart. When the guests rose for applause, I clapped too, my hands shaking, my chest tight. I told myself not to cry. Not today. Not here. Then I heard heels approaching. It was Margaret, my daughter-in-law's mother. Elegant, polished, smiling in a way that never reached her eyes. "I hope you're comfortable back here," she said sweetly. We tried to keep things balanced, as if I were a stain that needed to be placed where it wouldn't ruin the table setting. "I'm fine," I replied quietly. She looked me up and down. Daniel has worked very hard to build a certain image. There it was, an image, and I didn't fit it. I watched my son laugh at the head table. He looked confident, different. Not the boy who once cried because kids teased him for wearing thrift store sneakers. I remembered the night he got accepted into law school. He hugged me so tight and whispered, "I'll make you proud, Mom. One day, you won't have to struggle anymore." I never struggled for myself. I struggled for him. The reception moved into full celebration. Champagne poured. The band played louder. Guests toasted the couple. No one toasted the woman who sold her wedding ring to pay his first semester tuition. A waiter accidentally bumped my chair. "Sorry, ma'am." "It's all right," I said, because I was used to moving out of the way. That's when the ballroom doors opened again. The music softened slightly as a tall figure stepped inside, older, distinguished, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. I hadn't seen him in years. He scanned the room slowly until his eyes found mine, and then he smiled. Slowly, deliberately, he walked toward the back, not toward the head table, not toward the wealthy guests, toward me. The whisper started before he even reached my chair. "Is that? It can't be? What is he doing here?" He stopped beside me and gently pulled out the empty chair at my small, forgotten table. "May I?" he asked. My throat tightened. "Of course." He removed his sunglasses. And that was the moment Daniel looked up from the dance floor. He saw who was sitting next to me, and the color drained from his face, because the man sitting beside me wasn't just any guest. He was Charles Whitmore, the senior partner of the most powerful law firm in the state. The man Daniel had been trying desperately to impress for the past 3 years. The man who could make or destroy his entire career with a single phone call. Charles leaned closer to me. "I didn't realize they'd seat you back here," he said calmly. "It's all right," I replied, though my voice trembled slightly. "I prefer quiet." He studied the room. His expression shifted, subtle but sharp. "You shouldn't be back here." Before I could respond, Daniel was already crossing the ballroom fast. His smile was gone. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, trying to steady his voice. "I didn't know you were coming." Charles didn't stand. "I wouldn't miss this," he said coolly. "After all, your mother personally invited me." Daniel's head snapped toward me. I hadn't. But Charles continued. "She spoke very highly of you. Told me how hard you worked. The sacrifices she made." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Mom, can we talk?" I looked at my son, the same boy who once held my hand crossing the street. "Of course," I said softly. But Charles spoke again before Daniel could guide me away. "I actually requested to sit here," Charles said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "I prefer the company of people who built things from nothing." The room grew quieter. Margaret appeared at Daniel's side, confusion flickering across her face. "Is everything all right?" Charles finally stood, adjusting his cufflinks. "Perfectly," he said. "Though I must admit I'm surprised." "Surprised?" Margaret asked. "That the mother of the groom was seated by the service entrance." He replied calmly. A few heads turned. Conversation slowed. Daniel forced a laugh. "It was just a small mix-up." Charles interrupted him gently but firmly. "I've built my firm on loyalty, on remembering who stood beside us before success arrived." His eyes locked onto Daniel's, "and I pay very close attention to how people treat those who help them climb." The silence that followed felt like glass about to shatter. Daniel swallowed hard. "Sir, I would never." Charles raised a hand slightly. "Oh, I hope not." He looked back at me, his voice softening. "You must be very proud." Proud. The word felt heavy. I answered honestly. Daniel Flinch had stopped playing entirely now. Guests pretended not to stare, but they were listening. Charles reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a slim envelope. "I brought a wedding gift," he said. Daniel tried to smile again. That's very generous. It's not for you, Charles said calmly. He handed the envelope to me. Daniel's face went rigid. Margaret's polished composure cracked. My fingers trembled as I held it, feeling the weight of thick paper inside. Charles leaned closer and whispered, just loud enough for Daniel to hear, I believe it's time the truth had a proper seat at this table. Daniel's breathing became shallow, because he knew exactly what truth Charles was talking about. And as I slowly began to open the envelope, the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. My hands were steady now. Funny how humiliation can turn into clarity. I opened the envelope slowly, deliberately, feeling every eye in the ballroom pressing against my skin. Inside was a formal document, thick paper, official seal. I didn't need to read the header to understand what it was, but I read it anyway. The transfer agreement. 3 years ago, when Daniel was drowning in student loans and one disastrous investment nearly ended his career before it began, I had done something he never knew about. I sold the house. The small 2-bedroom house with the cracked porch and the lemon tree in the backyard. The one his father planted before he left. I told Daniel I was downsizing because I was tired of the maintenance. The truth? I liquidated everything, and I invested it, not into something random, into Charles Whitmore's struggling expansion project when no one else believed in it. Charles had come to the diner where I worked back then. He used to sit at booth 7, always ordering black coffee and reading case files. He looked exhausted that day, defeated. I asked what was wrong. He laughed and said, I'm about to lose half my firm because I trusted the wrong partners. I don't know why I did it. Maybe because I recognized that look. The look of someone who built something with their bare hands and watched others try to tear it down. I told him I had some savings. He refused at first, until I showed him the numbers. I had studied Daniel's textbooks at night after my shifts. I learned how to read contracts, how to analyze risk. He looked at me differently after that, not like a waitress, like a mind. He accepted the investment under one condition: it would be silent. No public records tying it to me. He didn't want anyone questioning why a diner worker was backing a major legal expansion. The firm survived, then it thrived, and that a small investment. It multiplied. Charles cleared his throat softly beside me. Go on, he said. I unfolded the second document inside the envelope. Gasps rippled through the nearest tables. It was a share certificate, not small, not symbolic, controlling interest in Whitmore and Hale, Daniel's firm, his dream partnership, his future. Charles spoke calmly, but his voice carried through the silence. 3 years ago, when no one would stand beside me, your mother did, quietly, without asking for recognition, without asking for a seat at any table. Daniel stared at the paper in my hands like it was a weapon. It can't be, he whispered. Oh, it can, Charles replied, and it is. Margaret stepped forward, her tone sharp now. This is inappropriate. Today is about the wedding. Charles finally looked at her fully. Character is never inappropriate, Mrs. Langford. Daniel's composure cracked. Mom, why didn't you tell me? I met his eyes. Because every time I tried to talk about sacrifice, I said gently, you said it was embarrassing. The words hit him harder than any accusation. I was protecting you? He insisted. You don't understand how their world works. I understand perfectly, I said. I just didn't want to become someone who forgets where he came from. A murmur of agreement moved through the guests. Charles continued. Daniel, when we considered making you junior partner this fall, I hesitated. Daniel's head snapped toward him. I hesitated, Charles repeated, because leadership is not about intelligence. It's about loyalty. And I wasn't sure you understood that. Daniel's voice dropped. Sir, I've given everything to the firm. Yes, Charles said, but would you give everything for the people who gave everything to you? Silence. The question hung heavy in the air. I looked down at the certificate again. Control. Power. The irony almost made me laugh. All my life, I avoided power. I avoided conflict. I swallowed pride so my son could rise. And now, power was sitting quietly in my hands. Daniel's eyes softened. For the first time all day, he looked like my son again. Not the polished attorney, not the ambitious social climber. Just my boy. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said, voice cracking. I wanted to fit in. At what cost? I asked. He had no answer. Margaret tried once more. Surely this can be handled privately. Charles shook his head. Public humiliation deserves public clarity. The band members stood frozen, instruments hanging uselessly in their hands. Guests were recording now, whispering, watching a different kind of ceremony unfold. I slowly folded the documents and placed them back into the envelope. Daniel's breath hitched slightly, as if waiting for a verdict. I never wanted control, I said quietly. I only wanted respect. Charles nodded. And respect, he added, is often tested in moments exactly like this. Daniel took a step closer to me. Mom, please. The word sounded small, human. The service doors behind me swung open and closed as waiters peeked out, pretending to check trays while clearly listening. For the first time that evening, I didn't feel invisible. I stood slowly. The room instinctively straightened with me. I wasn't tall. I wasn't glamorous. But in that moment, I felt unshakable. Daniel whispered, "What are you going to do?" I looked at him for a long time. At the Toksto, the polished shoes, the carefully curated life. Then I looked toward the head table, crystal glasses, golden centerpieces, reserved seats, a place where I was never meant to sit. Charles spoke softly beside me. The decision is yours. And as Daniel's entire future balanced on the next words I was about to say, I turned toward the head table and took my first step forward. Every heel step echoed across the marble floor like a countdown. The head table didn't look as far away anymore. Guests parted without being asked. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the chandeliers seemed to hum more quietly, as if the room itself understood that something irreversible was about to happen. Daniel followed half a step behind me. Not leading, following. For the first time in years, when I reached the head table, I didn't sit immediately. I looked at the place card with my daughter, in-law's name written in gold calligraphy. Beside it was Daniel's. Perfectly aligned, perfectly placed. There was no card for me. Margaret quickly moved one of the decorative menus aside. Please, she said tightly, forcing a smile, sit. I picked up one of the empty chairs and repositioned it slightly, not at the edge, not squeezed between floral arrangements, but centered between my son and his new wife. Gas fluttered again. I sat. Daniel stood there for a moment, unsure whether he had permission. Then slowly, he lowered himself into the chair beside me. His bride, Emily, looked nervous but not cruel. She leaned toward him and whispered, "What's happening?" He didn't answer. Charles remained near the back, watching carefully. I placed the envelope gently on the table between Daniel and me. "I never wanted to control your life," I said quietly, but the silence carried my voice to every corner. "I only wanted you to remember it." Daniel's eyes were red now. "I remember, Mom. Do you?" I asked softly. "Do you remember the winter the heater broke and we slept in the kitchen because the oven made it warmer? Do you remember how you cried because the other boys laughed at your coat? Do you remember promising me you would never look down on anyone?" His jaw tightened. "Yes." "Then why," I continued gently, "did you look at me today like I didn't belong here?" That question landed deeper than any accusation. He had no quick defense, no polished argument, no courtroom composure, just silence. Emily reached for his hand. "Daniel, is this true?" He nodded slowly. I thought if I kept worlds separate, it would be easier. "For who?" I asked. He couldn't answer that either. Margaret cleared her throat again, clearly desperate to regain control. "This is becoming dramatic. Surely we can celebrate and discuss investments another time." I finally looked at her directly. "This was never about money," I said. "Money is just what reveals character." A few guests murmured approval. Daniel turned toward me fully now. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't want a speech," I replied. "I want truth." He inhaled sharply. I was ashamed. The word cracked open the room. Emily's hand slipped from his. "I was ashamed," he repeated, forcing himself to finish. "Not of you. Of where we came from? I was scared they would judge me. That they'd think I wasn't enough. You were always enough," I whispered, "until you decided you weren't." A tear slid down his cheek. He didn't wipe it. The polished attorney mask was gone. Charles stepped forward slightly but didn't interrupt. Daniel looked around at the guests, the wealthy colleagues, the new family connections, the people he had tried so hard to impress. Then he did something no one expected. He stood up, picked up the microphone from the band's podium, and tapped it once. The feedback squealed sharp and uncomfortable. "Fitting. I need to say something." He began. The room froze again. "I worked my entire life to escape poverty," he said, "and somewhere along the way I started thinking escaping it meant erasing it." He looked directly at me. "I erased the person who made my success possible." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "My mother sold everything so I could stand here today, and I repaid her by seating her near the service door." He swallowed hard. "That is the truth." A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Margaret's lips pressed thin. Daniel continued, voice shaking but steadying as he went on. "I thought power meant fitting in with the right people. But power is remembering who carried you when you couldn't walk alone." He turned toward Charles. "Sir, if I've disappointed you, I understand." Charles crossed his arms, studying him carefully. "I'm not interested in perfection," Charles said. "I'm interested in growth." Daniel nodded once, absorbing that. Then he turned back to me and, in front of everyone, slowly lowered himself to one knee. Not dramatically, not theatrically, just sincerely. "I am sorry," he said. "Not because you have power, not because of those papers, but because you deserved better from me." The ballroom was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the air vents. All my anger, all my humiliation, all my quiet resentment from the past few years, it rose to the surface. I could end him professionally with a signature. I could step into control of the firm. I could shift the power dynamic forever. For once, the decision was mine. I placed my hand under his chin gently and lifted his face so he would look at me. "I didn't invest in that firm to own it," I said. "I invested because I believed in the man you were becoming." His breath trembled. "And today," I continued, "I saw two versions of you. One I don't recognize. And the envelope sat between us like a silent judge. I won't destroy your career," I said, "but I won't pretend nothing happened either." Daniel nodded slowly, accepting that. I stood again and turned toward the guests. "This wedding will continue," I said calmly, "because love should not be punished for pride." Then I looked at Daniel once more. But tomorrow, we will have a different conversation, one about integrity and consequences. His face tightened slightly at that word. Consequences. Charles stepped forward now, voice measured. The firm meeting is Monday morning, he said, and this matter will be discussed there. Daniel inhaled sharply. Not fired, not forgiven, something in between, the kind of uncertainty that forces change. I picked up the envelope again, feeling its weight one last time. Enjoy your evening, I told him quietly. Then I turned, walking away from the head table, not toward the service area this time, but toward the grand exit doors at the front of the ballroom. The chandeliers reflected against the polished floor as I moved. Behind me, whispers resumed. The band hesitated, then slowly began to play again, life continuing, but different. Just before I reached the doors, I heard Daniel's voice behind me. Mom, wait. I stopped. Didn't turn yet. His footsteps approached carefully, not rushing this time. I don't want you to leave like this, he said softly behind me. My hand rested on the door handle. And how do you want me to leave? I asked. There was a long pause. Proud? He answered. For a moment, I closed my eyes. And then, slowly, I began to turn back toward him. I studied his face carefully. Not the tuxedo. Not the polished image. Just his eyes. They weren't calculating anymore. They weren't worried about who was watching. They were afraid. Afraid of losing me. I have always been proud of you, I said quietly. Just not of the choices you made today. His shoulders dropped slightly, as if he had been carrying something too heavy for too long. I thought success meant never looking back, he admitted. I didn't realize looking back is what keeps you human. The ballroom lights reflected in his tears. Behind him, guests pretended not to stare again. But this time, the energy had shifted. It wasn't scandal now. It was reckoning. I released the door handle. Go back to your bride, I told him softly. Tonight belongs to her too. He hesitated. Will you stay? That question mattered more than the apology. I looked over his shoulder toward the head table. Emily was standing now, watching us, not angry, not cold. Just uncertain, nodded once. I'll stay. Relief flickered across his face, but I held up one finger gently. On one condition. He swallowed. Anything? You walk me to my seat. He blinked. Your seat. Yes, I said calmly. And this time we choose it together. A long pause. Then he offered his arm, not out of obligation. Out of respect, I placed my hand through it, and together we walked back across the ballroom floor. The movement felt symbolic, deliberate. Charles observed closely from near the center of the room, his expression unreadable but attentive. When we reached the head table again, Daniel didn't hesitate. He picked up my envelope, placed it directly in front of his own name card, then turned to a staff member. We need another place setting, he said clearly. Right here. No whispers now, just obedience. The staff quickly adjusted the table, adding silverware, a glass, a folded napkin. Margaret looked like she had swallowed something bitter, but she said nothing. Emily stepped forward and surprised everyone. She pulled out the chair beside hers, closer than before, and smiled at me gently. I'd like you here, she said softly. Not forced, not performative. Sincere, I studied her for a moment, searching for condescension. There was none. I sat. Daniel sat beside me, Emily on my other side. For the first time that evening, the seating felt balanced, not because of power, because of acknowledgement. The band resumed playing slower now, softer. Conversations restarted carefully, like people testing thin ice. Dinner continued, but it felt different. Daniel leaned closer quietly. What's gonna happen Monday? I took a slow sip of water before answering. That depends on you. His brow furrowed. You have influence at that firm now, I continued. Because of me. Not because of me. Because of your work, don't waste it trying to impress people who measure worth in background checks and bloodlines. He nodded slowly. Charles approached the table at last, hands clasped behind his back. He said respectfully, Charles. He glanced between Daniel and me. I've seen men crumble under public correction, he said calmly, and I've seen some rise from it. Monday will reveal which one your son is. Daniel straightened slightly at that. I won't disappoint you again. Daniel said quietly. Charles's eyes sharpened. Don't worry about disappointing me, he replied. Worry about disappointing her. He inclined his head toward me. Then he walked away. Margaret finally spoke again, though her voice had lost its earlier edge. Would all make mistakes, she said stiffly. Tonight should be joyful. It will be, I answered. Joy built on truth lasts longer. She didn't respond. As the evening unfolded, I noticed subtle shifts. Colleagues who had once barely nodded in my direction now introduced themselves respectfully. Partners from the firm approached Daniel differently, not with casual superiority, but with measured caution. Power had rearranged the room. But I remained still. I didn't brag. I didn't threaten. I simply existed. And that presence alone changed everything. Later, during the father-son dance substitute, since his father had never been around, Daniel surprised everyone again. He walked to the microphone once more. There's one more dance, he announced. A soft murmur moved through the guests. He walked directly toward me and extended his hand. For the woman who never missed a shift, who never missed a bill, who never missed believing in me. The room quieted again. I hesitated only a second before placing my hand in his. The music shifted to something slow, emotional. We stepped onto the dance floor. His hands trembled slightly as he placed them respectfully at my waist. When did you become taller than me? I whispered faintly. He gave a weak laugh. A long time ago. No, I said softly. Not in height. His jaw tightened. I'm sorry, he repeated again, but this time it wasn't desperate. It was grounded. No, I replied. We moved slowly across the floor. Cameras flashed, but I didn't feel humiliated anymore. I felt seen. Halfway through the song, Daniel leaned down slightly. I'll earn it back, he murmured. Your respect, not because of shares, because I want to. I studied him carefully. Redemption isn't proven in grand gestures. It's proven in patterns. We'll see. I answered gently. The song ended to quiet applause. Not explosive, not theatrical, but sincere. As we stepped off the dance floor, I noticed something else. The service area door, where I had been seated earlier, was now empty. No one occupied that forgotten corner, because no one wanted to be associated with that decision anymore. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Later, as the night thinned and guests began to leave, Daniel walked me toward the exit himself. No rushing, no embarrassment, just steady steps. Outside, the air was cool, crisp. He stopped beside my car. I don't deserve how patient you've been, he admitted. Patience isn't weakness, I replied. It's investment. He looked at me carefully. Are you taking control of the firm? He asked quietly. I held the envelope in my hands again, feeling its. I haven't decided, I said truthfully. His breath caught slightly. But I promise you this, I continued. Whatever decision I make, it won't be driven by revenge. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, because consequences without revenge can be even more powerful. I opened my car door, then paused. Monday will tell me who you really are, I said. He nodded once, accepting that. As I sat inside and closed the door, he remained standing there, no longer pale, just thoughtful. And as I drove away from the glittering lights of the wedding venue, the envelope resting quietly on the passenger seat beside me, I knew one thing for certain. The real decision wasn't about ownership. It was about whether my son had truly changed. And Monday morning would prove it. Monday morning arrived without music, without flowers, without applause. Just silence. The Whitmore and Hale building stood tall against the gray skyline, all glass and steel, intimidating, polished, powerful. I had walked past buildings like this for years while wearing a diner uniform, never imagining I would one day walk inside holding something that could shift its foundation. The envelope rested in my handbag, heavy not because of paper, because of choice. When I entered the lobby, conversations subtly quieted. Receptionists who once might have overlooked me now stood straighter. Respect moves fast in places like this. Mrs. Carter? One of them said politely. Mr. Whitmore is expecting you. Of course he was. The elevator ride felt longer than it probably was. My reflection in the mirrored walls showed a woman who had cried, sacrificed, swallowed pride, and survived all of it. The boardroom doors were already open when I arrived. Inside sat the senior partners, men and women in tailored suits, calculating eyes, decades of legal power around one long polished table. Daniel stood near the far end, not seated, waiting. Charles Whitmore stood at the head of the table. He nodded as I entered. Thank you for coming. I took a seat halfway down the table, not at the head, not hidden in the corner. Balanced, Charles began without theatrics. As everyone here now knows, Mrs. Carter holds controlling shares in this firm. A murmur moved across the table, though they all already knew. Daniel kept his eyes on me. Today, Charles continued, she will decide how to proceed. Every gaze shifted in my direction. Power feels strange when you've never chased it. I placed the envelope gently on the table but didn't open it yet. Before I could speak, Daniel stepped forward. I'd like to say something first. Charles raised a brow but nodded. Daniel inhaled slowly. No courtroom confidence this time, just honesty. I built my career believing that success meant distance from struggle. He said, distance from where I came from. He looked directly at the partners. I was wrong. Silence. My mother worked double shifts so I could study. She sold her home so I could survive a financial mistake I was too proud to admit. And I repaid her by being embarrassed of her presence at my wedding. The bluntness of it made several partners shift uncomfortably. I have asked her forgiveness, he continued. But that doesn't erase what it revealed about me. He turned toward me fully. If she decides I'm unfit to be partner, I'll accept it. The room stiffened. Career suicide in a single sentence. But he didn't stop. I don't want position without integrity. He added, if I lead here someday, I want it to be because I deserve it, not because she saved me again. He stepped back. No dramatic finish, just truth. The boardroom was impossibly still. Charles studied me carefully. Well, he said quietly, the floor is yours. This was the moment revenge stories are built around. The dramatic takeover, the public demotion, the fall from grace. And for a second, just a second, I imagined it. I imagined signing the papers, removing his promotion, forcing him to rebuild from the bottom the way I once had to. It would be justified. But justified isn't always wise. I opened the envelope slowly and removed the share certificate. The paper felt crisp between my fingers. I did not invest in this firm to control it. I began calmly. I invested because I believed in resilience. I saw it in Charles, and I saw it in my son. A few partners exchanged glances. Control, I continued, is easy when you have leverage. Leadership is harder. I stood. I will not be taking over daily operations of this firm. Relief flickered across more than one face. But, I added evenly, I will remain majority shareholder. The relief tightened. This firm will establish a scholarship fund immediately, I said, for students from working-class families entering law school, full tuition support, mentorship included. Charles's lips twitched, slightly impressed. And Daniel, I said, turning toward him, will run it. His eyes widened. Not as a reward, I clarified, as responsibility. The room absorbed that carefully. If he believes background doesn't define capability, I continued, then he will prove it by opening doors for those who start where he did. Daniel's throat tightened. You will not become junior partner this year, I added calmly. A sharp intake of breath from the table. You will earn it next year if the board agrees your leadership reflects growth. Daniel nodded slowly. I understand. There was no resentment in his voice, only acceptance. Charles leaned back slightly, clearly satisfied. A balanced decision, he said. I looked around the boardroom. I am not here for revenge, I said quietly. Revenge would have been easy. Correction is harder. The room sat with that. I gathered the papers and placed them back into the envelope. Meeting adjourned, Charles announced after a moment. Chairs shifted. Conversations restarted. Partners approached me one by one, respectfully now, not cautiously. When the room emptied, Daniel remained. Just the two of us. He stepped closer. You didn't have to spare me, he said quietly. This wasn't sparing, I replied. It was redirecting. He gave a small, almost broken laugh. I don't deserve you. Probably not, I said gently. But you're my son. That's the inconvenient thing about love. It doesn't dissolve when pride cracks. He looked at me carefully. I'll build that scholarship, he said, and I'll build it right. I know, I answered. He hesitated. Are you proud now? I stepped closer and placed my hand on his cheek, the same way I had when he was a little boy afraid of thunderstorms. I was always proud of the boy who shared his lunch when others had none. I said softly, be that man again. His eyes filled. I will. As I walked toward the elevator, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not triumph, not dominance. Peace. The wedding humiliation had stung. The boardroom tension had tested me. But in the end, I hadn't lost my son. I had forced him to confront himself. And sometimes, that is the most powerful revenge of all. Months later, the scholarship launched publicly. Daniel stood at the podium during the announcement. He didn't mention shares. He didn't mention power. He mentioned sacrifice. He mentioned his mother. And this time, when cameras turned toward me in the audience, I didn't feel like someone hidden near a service door. I felt like the foundation. Because the truth is, the most powerful seat in the room isn't always at the head table. Sometimes, it's the one you earn by standing your ground when everyone expects you to stay silent. And my son never forgot that lesson again. Not because I humiliated him, but because I reminded him who he was, and who he almost stopped being.